So shall we just start with the subject for year 4, which is Orientalism. Brother Arwa, this is the subject for today. We'll be talking about Orientalism. And I'm sure that you must have read something about it in the past. Or
I have some knowledge,
did you?
but not very much.
Not very much, right. And you, Brother Luqman, you come to know about this before? Right. Has anybody in the class here read anything about istishraq or Orientalism in Arabic or in English? You know, the concept of Orientalism, the aims and objectives of Orientalism, the dynamics of Orientalism, anything about Orientalism other than the title?
It's just a general idea that Orientalism means that people in the West are interested in studying Eastern civilization. Civilizations include religion, include culture, include language, food, and everything. And the cause they are doing this, according to my knowledge, is they believe they have many defects in the civilizations in spiritual aspects and cultural aspects, and maybe some of them try to find what they're missing in the East. Others, on the opposite, they believe that they are superior to the Eastern people, and they try to study them so that they can control them in better ways.
Right. So to some extent, this is true, and this is like the very decent understanding of the job of the Orientalist, the person who studies the Orient. You know, our approach for this, inshallah, module will be more critical. And, you know, as this is something that we used to do in the previous term, that we are trying to dig up for the basic motives and objectives for this kind of interest, the interest of the people in the West, the Westerners, in the culture, in the religion, in the business, in the social aspects of the Orient. And here we'll be dealing with a book that in its time was considered as a revolutionary work in the field of Orientalism. And this book, which was very critically written and very carefully presented by its author, aimed to find out why people, you know about this book, brothers, Luqman? How these people, or what were the motives of the Westerners presenting this Orient to the West? Was it just because of their fascination of this kind of culture, or was it to serve some certain purposes and needs in their societies? Because all the literature, the material about the Orient was presented in the West in different channels and in different environments and in different maybe if you call them disciplines. Like people who come to the Orient to study maybe religion, others who come to study sociology, others would come to study anthropology, others would come to study history. We'd have different attitudes and different interests of the Westerners in the Orient. And this book, whose author is Edward Said, you must have heard about this name. It was written in the early 80s. I think it is like 79, 78. It came to reveal the actual motives of the Westerners who were specialists in the Orient. He tried to find out the essential motives that drove them to come to the Orient and look at it in a specific way and present it to their own people in that way to satisfy their needs, to search, to answer for some questions that people in the West have been searching, and in a particular way that shapes the understanding of the people of the West of this Orient. Okay? So this is the book. This is the book by Edward Said. And as I said, maybe, if I'm not exaggerating, maybe thousands of books were written. This is, I mean, the picture itself is very significant. The picture is aimed here, you'll see it, is aimed here to show you how the Orient is presented to the West. In what way and what were the stereotypes that were understood about the West, about the Orient, and were presented to the West in that way. So if it says, for example, it says the religious people in the West are mostly like Sufis. They are indifferent with the world. They just sit there in the dervishes' circles and they eat fatta and lahma and they do lots of things. Okay? Or maybe maybe because they have more interest in what nowadays forms Iran and the Persian Gulf area. They were interested in presenting Islam to them, to the Westerners, as a kind of literature that only is interested in poems and love and dietary habits and other things. But in depth, there was no kind of actual understanding of the reality of that Orient. Okay? And this, in part, had a special reason, which was to serve the imperialist authorities of the Westerner people on the West. This is to show, and we will discuss this now, why do we need to study Orientalism and what Orientalism or how Orientalism presents the Orient to the West. We'll understand this, but this is in some way was a manipulated image of the Orient, so they can present it to the West for many reasons. You can see the Orient and the Occident. This is the opposite of the Orient. The Orient and the Occident are two histories, two sets of traditions. Each of them possesses its own thoughts, its own imagery, its own vocabulary, its own culture that have presented them in each other's eyes. But on the part of the Orient, there was no such reciprocal motivation among people in the Orient to study the Occident in the same way. And this is due to several reasons. One of which, because at the time, the imperial power of the West was dominating the Orient in itself. So they had no access to imitate the attempts and the trials of the Westerners of exploring that Occident. Like someone who is a servant and someone who is a master. The master has control, full control of the servant, but the servant has no equal position or equal power over his master. Right? The Orientalist, whether be him a scholar, be him a missionary, be him a trader, or anyone who comes to the Orient, he had full access to the Orient. But the people in the Orient didn't have that same facility. Okay, that's why we only have one-sided version of the Orient in the eyes of the Westerners, and we didn't have a reciprocal one. When you look at Orientalism in the dictionary, you would find that only specialized dictionaries would give you an understanding of